on this computer.
Okay, hi Lori, how are you?
Good. How are you doing, Jacie?
Good. Super excited to be doing another episode. I've been loving all the feedback we've been getting. People have sent in some really nice messages about the Tidal Talks and the topics that we're covering on it. So
I agree.
awesome.
Yep.
Today, we were going to just chat a little bit about self-compassion and what that looks like, what self-compassion actually means,
Yep.
and maybe a couple of little practices people can put into place to help grow self-compassion.
Yeah.
So if you want to start us off there.
Yeah. I mean, we talk about self-compassion. We don't always use that language, but I think it is the whole idea or understanding of how we judge ourselves or view ourselves. So when we're working with our clients and we're teaching people to understand the importance of self-compassion, we can get really stuck. We can get stuck in the emotions. We can get stuck in the thoughts. We can get stuck in the triggers, and we can create a whole narrative and a whole story about who we are as people because of what we're experiencing. So what self-compassion is trying to do is trying to help us unstuck that and start looking at ourselves through a new light in a new way without having that stigma attached to it. So, I think we can all cognitively understand what it means to be self-compassionate, right? To view yourself in a more positive way.
Easy to
Sounds
explain it in words, and feeling it is a totally different thing.
exactly. And so one of the resources that I've often used with clients and directed clients to is Kristen Neff has a website. I think it's self-compassion.org, but I think she's a social worker as well, social work research who really studies self-compassion. So she actually has a lot of good resources, and she has some meditations and stuff on her website. We can link that in the comments if anyone wants to check her out. But what I like about her work is she does really talk about the mindfulness of it all, of just noticing when we're starting to have some of those conflicts around what we're feeling or what we're experiencing. So being mindful. I don't know if we've done a Tidal Talk on mindfulness in itself yet, have we? That might be
No,
a
we
topic for
haven't, but
another day.
that's next week.
We're always trying to think ahead for some ideas to talk about. But she speaks a lot about the mindfulness of first just noticing what you're experiencing in that non-judgmental step back stance. But one of the things I really like about what she talks about is about our emotions and our experiences being part of our shared humanity. So what she means by that is, when you're going through something really terrible, or you're feeling guilt, or you're feeling shame, or you're questioning yourself for something that you did, it's such an isolating feeling. You kind of like go inwards and you start thinking about, did anyone else notice that? Did I embarrass myself? But really, when we're thinking through a lens of self-compassion, we're starting to notice that these feelings that I'm experiencing are part of my humanity. That's what part of what makes me as a human being. So when we can step back and start seeing what we're experiencing is not just about what's happening inside of me, but it's about what's happening because, I'm part of a society of people, and that's just what we experience as humans.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, we didn't even chat about this before, but that brings me straight into thinking about like emotionally intimate connections with people.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the really amazing things that happen when you start creating self-compassion is that you let that shame and vulnerability out, because you're no longer judging it as a bad thing.
Yep.
And you're giving everyone around you permission to do that at the same time. And you can really create these like deep, meaningful, and vulnerable connections with people that, again, like you said, that's where that humanity comes into play. And when other people when we're witnessing each other sharing those experiences as they are without judging those experiences, it creates this amazing community and support, and it almost like washes all the shame away from the experience itself, right?
Yeah, totally. And as you're talking, because this is what happens when we do it, it triggers other
Yes.
things in us. It just really makes me think about like that compassion for other people, because the more you can kind of practice your own self-compassion and compassion towards other, it gets easier to see in other people, right? So somebody's behavior, somebody's emotion, or somebody's actions, when you start getting really aware of what it means to be compassionate to both yourself and somebody else, you just see it in a different way. You don't just see what's on the exterior, you see that vulnerability that's different.
Right. And that kind of comes into the non-judgment thing that we were talking about earlier is, I think there's this tendency that our brain does this, right? And this is part of our survival mechanism kicking in, is we polarize experiences. Something's either all good or all bad.
Yeah.
And that's kind of our brain's way of kicking in and protecting us from potentially dangerous situations, right? Yeah. But when we can step back and create that distance through that mindfulness, like recognize anger is a great emotion to talk about self-compassion with, I find, because people do judge anger as a bad or dangerous emotion. And so if you're feeling angry, taking that step back, noticing, okay, I feel angry right now. Anger itself is not good or bad, right? And recognizing it's there to show you something or to give you a message. Yeah. And accepting that right now I feel angry. There's a reason, there's a message. It doesn't make me a bad person. It doesn't make me less healed. It doesn't make me less anything because I feel angry. It just makes me human, and it makes me real. And then, like you said, the more you give yourself that compassion, the easier it is to look at someone else and say, oh, they're angry a lot of the time. That doesn't make them a bad person. They probably just aren't aware enough to understand what messages their anger is sending. And you create this space of like, oh, like that's understandable. Like I can see why they would want to shy away from that, because it is an uncomfortable emotion. And I do the same thing.
Right.
And then everyone's just, we're all the same, right? Finding that totally common ground of, like you said, shared humanity.
Yeah. It's such a neat way of looking at things, because you're right. Like when we judge or when we view somebody else's behavior, and I think, like you said, if somebody seems to be stuck in an angry emotion, chances are they're probably not being very compassionate, self-compassionate to themselves either, right? Like, and we don't want to perpetuate that. We want to be able to offer like the calming, the understanding, and the compassion of what's going on. Because you're right. Like the more you try to push away the unpleasantness of what's underneath that emotion or whatever's going on, it ain't going anywhere. Whereas if you can
resist, the more it persists.
Absolutely. It's funny.
I think anyone who's ever gone to therapy is sick of hearing that.
But when you were talking, I was thinking about it, because last week I was a little bit angry because I was supposed to be on vacation this week in Nova Scotia, and I was really looking forward to it. And I remember when I heard that wasn't going to happen, I just felt it, right? But I didn't shame myself for it. Like I knew I was angry. I knew why I was angry, but I did just kind of sit with the emotion long enough that it did shift into something else. I mean, I'm on vacation anyway. And I'm not angry, right? But if I had not allowed myself to kind of sit with the emotion, work through the emotion, understand, like, yeah, it sucks, right? Like anger kind of comes out of a place of feeling like that's not fair, or I wish it wasn't happening that way. And it's okay. I'm sure I wasn't the only one angry either.
Right. Yeah. And to shame yourself for that is to deny your humanity, right?
Yeah.
Because you're right. There were so many people who were angry about that.
Yeah.
And of course, it's a natural reaction. It's like sadness is another one that people love to push away, right? People don't want to feel sad, but if you don't give yourself the compassion to say, I'm really sad right now and I'm going to let myself feel that. Yeah. Sadness is one that the more you push it down, the more it builds up, and it really affects your whole nervous system.
Yep,
and,
totally.
And your whole body starts to lose energy because you're not allowing that emotion to be expressed and to actually physically leave your body.
Yeah. It makes me think too about the whole experience of grief. What do we do when someone's grieving? We do anything we can to say the right word to make them feel better, bring food, do whatever it is. But sometimes really what we need to do for people is just let them be in that emotion of grief and sadness is what we should be experiencing after a loss.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about letting, whether it's yourself or other people, allow the emotion, feel the emotion, and don't judge the emotion. And that is, I guess, self-compassion in a bit of a nutshell.
Yeah. And you know what? I'm always thinking when we do these things, but it just made me think of how many clients I've worked with who have felt guilty or bad because they're not out of their grief quick enough. Like, I should be over it by now. Why don't I feel better? And actually, Jacie, what you and I were talking about a little bit earlier too, is how even in therapy, sometimes people will be frustrated with themselves because they don't think they're getting better quick enough, or they don't want to waste our time. And we're like, that's what we're here for, right? This isn't, to be able to start with that piece of self-compassion, like, this is your space, this is your journey, and it takes what it takes.
I actually wrote a quote this morning very connected to that, and it said, you're further along than you think you are. Don't let what is meant to be a lesson become a barrier.
Interesting.
And I thought that was really beautiful. Like
Yeah.
allow yourself to witness the experience,
Yeah.
to learn from it, and to move forward,
Yeah.
rather than judging yourself and keeping yourself stuck in it.
Yeah, that's a good one. I love quotes.
Me
Quotes
too.
can sum up what we just spent 10 minutes trying to explain in a whole bunch of words, but you get the right quote, it just makes it all make sense.
Yeah,
um,
absolutely.
that one little piece, I guess I just wanted to add before we kind of close out. We do try to keep these fairly brief, but that question I know both you and I use, and I'm sure a lot of therapists use, is when people are really struggling with that piece to find self-compassion for themselves, when they're judging themselves or frustrated with what they're feeling or thinking. And we turn it around and we say, you know, if this was someone you loved, if this was your child, if this was your best friend, what would you say to them? And I mean, so often when we're berating ourselves for something we're going through, as soon as you turn it around, you'd be so much more compassionate to somebody you care about and say, don't be so hard on yourself. That's normal. Take a break. Like, we're full of wonderful, supportive advice for the people we love. But for some reason, it's really hard to do for ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. I always say, how would you speak if a 5-year-old came to you with this problem? Right.
Yeah. It's a pretty good strategy, actually. I mean,
I use it on myself all the time.
Yeah, me too. So if we're talking strategies, I think, to becoming more self-compassionate, I think we should do a Tidal Talk on mindfulness and maybe give people a few more tips and tricks on how to be more mindful. But I think just noticing, stepping away, not being judgmental, and using that kind of compassionate question of, you know, what would I say to somebody I love if they were going through this exact same thing?
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for all the thoughts and the input on that. Now I'm excited for our mindfulness talk.
I know, write that one down quick. We'll get that one in the series. So, and if anyone listening has any ideas for things they want to hear us talk about, don't hesitate to share that too. All right. Well, awesome. I hope you have a good rest of your day, and we'll do it again soon.
All right. Thanks. See ya.
Bye-bye.